Unless information handling becomes a command function in parallel to the planning and execution of kinetic operations, it's going to be difficult to manage or control the information flow or counter the adversary's information or disinformation campaign.
About the six dimensions of land, sea, air, cyberspace and information. You always want to produce effects which have a multiplier. You don't want a summation of these six, but you want a summation plus. Right. And that summation plus can only come through orchestration. Someone has to sequence, someone has to phase, someone has to plan, someone has to be a master puppeteer, so to speak, to make sure that these vectors are applied in such a combination that the effects are much greater than purely the sum of all six of them. Yeah. Right. So good evening everyone and welcome to the next episode of Double M Dialogues. I'm really delighted to have Nitin Gokhale as my guest today, an old friend and colleague. And I must firstly place on record the tremendous amount of work you've done in preparing armed forces officers in handling is the wrong word, but in dealing with the media and getting their point across. Yeah.
Thank you, Monty. I'm delighted to be on the Double M Dialogues, which is, I think, one of its kind of YouTube channel that you've started.
So let me start firstly by asking you that, as we are moving along in not only in conflict, but even in less than conflict situations, control of the information domain in any contested environment becomes an extremely important part in today's context. Could you elaborate on that and tell us about that?
Yes, I think for a long time, at least for a decade now, I've held this view that, and I've, so like you mentioned that I speak to so many military officers, I've held the view that unless information handling becomes a command function in parallel to the planning and execution of kinetic operations, it's going to be difficult to manage or control the information flow or counter the adversary's information or disinformation campaign. That's my first take on this, the current environment everywhere. Because I think it's now the sixth dimension, if I can use that term, like if you have land, air, sea and space and cyber, and then the sixth one, combining all these five into a sixth one would be the information domain, which needs to be handled in a manner that combines all the strengths of these other five domains and then gives an advantage, because that's where I think even before the kinetic operations begin, we need to have the information management model in place and people to execute that.
So, when you're dealing with information, of course, there are multiple levels at which you have to do with it. One is, of course, orchestration at the national level. Yeah. But even within the armed forces, you've talked about the six dimensions of land, sea, air, cyberspace and information. Yes. You always want to produce effects which have a multiplier. You don't want a summation of these six, but you want a summation plus. Right. And that summation plus can only come through orchestration. Someone has to sequence, someone has to phase, someone has to plan, someone has to be a master puppeteer, so to speak, to make sure that these vectors are applied in such a combination that the effects are much greater than purely the sum of all six of them. Yeah. Right. That, to my mind, requires some higher degree of integration, and one hopes you think theaterization that way will play a critical role in bringing these together and making sure that there's synergistic application of the information dimension in all aspects of warfare?
I think so, because like what is the final objective of theaterization, to have more combat effective power, military power to be applied. Something similar will come through if theaterization happens, because then information will come to the theaters, and then if there is integration, it all can be applied and utilized for the effect, that multiplier effect that you spoke about. But in that, you talked about orchestration. So one is, of course, that the military orchestrates the information, but there has to be at least three layers, if not two, for orchestration. It has to be at the national level, right at the highest level, and then at the military level, where theaterization is the second layer, and the third will be then according to the domain that you are fighting in. That can be siloed, but we need that because, and it needs a national effort. I mean, just having military doing it or through theaterization doing it will not be as effective as it would be at the national level, which all elements come in there. It comes in your political element. There is the interior ministry or the home ministry. There comes some MEA. All of them have to come together and have a structure or a mechanism which then applies the information.
So you'll have to have information flow also from the military to the higher body, etc., to make sure that you're synchronized totally.
Absolutely. It has to be a all-encompassing kind of a structure.
So Nitin, you've spent decades, I would say, in talking, in grooming military officers and handling, how to interact with the information in the information dimension. Firstly, the information dimension has, I would say, expanded exponentially with social media and things like that, where. So my question today is that even though the younger generation of officers are quite savvy in handling electronic equipment, etc., but you think they are adequately prepared at multiple echelons in dealing with this in its totality, or is there you think there's still a long way to go?
I think it's still a long way to go because they know the principles of it, or like you said, they know they're electronically savvy or they're technically savvy. But the application of information, disinformation, misinformation, countering misinformation, disinformation, that I think will become, as we go into the future, will become more and more specialization domain as far as military is concerned. And I don't expect, frankly, because they are all brilliant people, but I don't expect everyone to know this. So the military needs to actually now think of, may not be a cadre, but a group of officers in every service, officers and men, who can actually look at this as a specialization, and they get a clear path for progress. Career progression has to be also there. Because if you look at some of the other examples, let's take the US example or the UK example. US was very bad during the Vietnam War, but in the first Gulf War, they proved to be much better and actually overcame the shortcomings in the Vietnam War. And then they now have perfected the art of having all this. Although I must also say this, that information domain will be effective only as much as the kinetic application of force is. It can't be totally separated or divorced from reality. But having said that, look at the UK, for instance. It's got such a small military, but it's got they re-raised the Chindits Brigade, the 77th Brigade in 2012 and called it the Information Brigade. And there are some 2,500 people there. There's 70% of them are civilians who are specialists in making whatever the deliverables you require. But military is also, of course, the controlling authority. I think we need to think on those lines now. Now that we have the, say, EW Brigade, we have the Cyber Brigade or whatever cyber agency, but we must also look at the Information Brigade in the theaterization construct as we go forward, is what my thing. I'm sanguine that the average military officer, if trained well, can actually take up the job. But right now, there's a shortcoming there.
So, it leads me to my last question right now, which is, you talked about specialization. So one is, of course, that you have a specialized cadre of people, etc., who are, trained and who are familiar with the environment, who know the people they're talking to by first names and all that sort of stuff here. Second is that you have operators, who are actually planners. They will not have the time to specialize in this, but they bring credibility of their own to the, because, they are the people who are actually engaged in the day-to-day operations and conceiving it and executing those plans. Absolutely. What do you think is a better option for us? Should it be the specialists, or should it be the operators who form the front in dealing with media and management of that?
So there are stages in which we will get into this. Initially, let's take the example of Operation Sindoor. The first day was a brilliant masterstroke of having those two ladies there, lady officers with the foreign secretary, all that. But that was not sustainable. And that's where we faltered. I think India faltered there, because the moment the DGs came in, DG MOs or DGs military operations came in, they brought in the credibility which was required. They can take questions. They're knowledgeable. They're into the middle of all this, so they know it. but the ladies couldn't take the question.
But they may lack in the ability to, because they're not sort of trained in dealing with treatment, so that
But I think my submission for all this has been always been: be yourself. You're confident enough, you know your domain, and that's a given. So I think that again, that application of those people and which layer to be used is left to the situation that we come into and how it develops. But you require both. I won't say that only the specialists can do the job, because they will not have the full picture. I mean, we have had the examples of the poor PROs, the public relations officers in the old days, who were the last people to get to know what's happening really, and then that didn't work at all. But now at least they're integrated, they're getting more and more integrated. You have the other MPR and other stuff in the military. MEA has been a good example of the XP division, the external publicity division. They're specialists, and they pick up the best people who have gone on to become foreign secretaries from there in the MEA. So that something of that element from the MEA, something from the military, and a national structure is actually required to sort of game this whole advantage if we need to, because we are still I think lacking in that, and Operation Sindoor proved that despite winning the kinetic battle and the kinetic war, we finally faltered. We were on the back foot for a while, but I think we recovered well. But why get on the back foot at all when you have the advantage of knowing how to do it?
So that being said, Nitin, it remains for me to thank you once again for participating over here, and look forward to many such conversations in future.
Anytime. Thank you.